sure you watch this video to the end if you want to know how I made this beautiful dress. Hi guys, welcome back to Tailored by Viv. On this channel, I share sewing tutorials and useful sewing tips. So if you're not yet part of the community, make sure you tap on that subscribe button right now because you're going to love it here. Now let's get straight into today's tutorial. I have 2.5 yards Mikado fabric here that I'll be using for this project. I'll be cutting the front and the back together, so I'll fold my fabric into two and then I'll go ahead to fold it into two again, making it 4. From the edge of the fabric, I'll come down by 1 inch to mark my start line. Because of the design at the bottom part of the dress, I won't be measuring the full length of the dress. I'll be marking out 47 inches. But you can also decide to mark out the full length of the dress and later you separate it. So either way works. The sleeve is continuous with the shoulder, so I'll be using the entire width of my fabric. So if you want a longer sleeve length, you know you have to get more fabric. From the start line, I'll mark my chest line, which is 9 inches, and I'll draw out the line. I'll also mark out my half length line. From the half length line, I'll come down by 8 inches and mark my hip line. On the chest line, I'll mark a quarter of my bust measurement. On the waistline, I'll mark a quarter of my waist measurement. And on the hip line, I'll mark a quarter of my hip measurements. Next, I'll be adding the amount of ease I want on my dress. Now, this is totally up to you. You can add between 3 to 5 inches depending on how wide you want it to be. Here, I'm adding 3 inches to mine. So I'll be adding these 3 inches to the bust, to the waist, and to the hips. And then I'll connect all the points together. From the hip line, I'll take the same measurements I have straight down. For the shoulder and sleeve measurements, I'll be marking 20 inches. Next, I'll be marking my shoulder slope. So I'll mark my shoulder measurements divided by 2, which is 8 inches. And on the 8 inches mark, I'll come down by 1 inch for my shoulder slope. From the center, I'll go in by 3 inches. And from that 3 inches, I'll draw a straight line passing through the 1 inch shoulder slope down to the sleeve length. Next, I'll be marking my sleeve opening. Now this is up to you. You can make it as wide as you want, but I'm using 12 inches for mine. So I'll mark my 12 inches here, and from that point, I'll draw a curve to connect it to the body. I'm just blending the lines so I don't have any sharp points. I'll be marking the neckline of the front and the back at the same time. I'll be using a neck width of 4 inches, while for the neck depth, I'll be using 1 inch for the back and 3.5 inches for the front. For the opening on the front neckline, I'll be coming down by 6 inches. And then I'll go in by half an inch and I'll connect both points to get my V opening. I'll add half-inch seam allowance all around the neckline and on the shoulder. At the sleeve hem, I will add 1 inch and at the sides, I will add 1 inch. At the bottom part of the dress, I'll be adding half an inch. I'll go ahead to cut it out. I'll be cutting the back neckline first, after which I will separate the two pieces and I will cut out the front neckline on one. Remember we cut out 47 inches earlier? I'll be using the remaining parts to complete the length of the dress. What I have here is about 10 inches. That's making it a total of 57 inches. My full length is about 61 inches. I'll be using the black design to make up for the remaining length of the dress. I'll mark out my gown width. That's the same measurement I used from the hip to the bottom, and I'll cut it out. Here I'm just trimming off the rough edge of the fabric. I'll set this aside and I'll cut the facing for the necklines next. I'll be placing it on the right side of the fabric this way, and I'll sew around the neckline with half-inch sewing allowance. I'll repeat the same thing for the back. After sewing round, I'll notch around the seam allowance and I'll flip it over and top stitch on the facing. I'll also be weaving around the outer edge of my facing. I'm done sewing round this part, and I've also weaved around my facing. When sewing round, I attached my tassel in between. You can see the way I placed it at the right part of my fabric, and I stitched around the rope to secure it. Now I'll just notch all around to make it relax better when I flip it over. When I'm done notching, I'll flip it over and I'll top stitch on my facing, making sure that the seam is on the facing. I'll repeat the same thing for the back. I've joined the front and the back together, and I've also hemmed my sleeve opening. Next, I'll be closing up the sides with my 1-inch sewing allowance. I'm done closing up the sides. I didn't sew all the way down because of the opening we have by the sides. The next thing I'll be working on is the design on the dress. I'm measuring the width and I have about 29.5 inches here. I'll be cutting out this measurement on my paper. For the length of the design, I'll be using 3.5 inches, and I'll be adding 1 inch for joining on both sides. This is making a total of 4.5 inches. I'll go ahead to mark 4.5 inches. Now you can determine the length you want to use for yours. I'll mark out the 29.5 inches width. I'll be needing two of these, one for the front and one for the back. So I'll repeat the same measurement again. So these are the two pieces I'll be making my design on. For the design, I'll be using this black satin fabric. This is a doll face satin and you will need about 1 yard for this. I'll fold my fabric into two and I'll mark out 1.5 inches. I'll go ahead to cut this out. I'll use this to cut out more strips. I'll be folding the strip this way and sewing it down. I'll do this for all the strips of fabric I cut. I'm done sewing all my strips and I'll be sewing it onto my paper. But before I do that, I'll be cutting it into 4.5 inches length to match the length of my paper. So whatever measurement you use for your paper, use that in cutting out your strips. I'm done cutting them. Now it's time to start sewing. I'll be placing the strips on it this way and I'll be sewing right through the middle. Now you can draw a straight line through the middle of the paper to serve as a guide. This will help make the sewing line straight. Also make sure you backstitch at the beginning and at the end to make sure your thread doesn't unravel. You also want to make sure you're placing your strips close to each other without any space between them. I'll be doing this till I get to the end of the paper. I'm done sewing everything down, and here's what I'll be doing next. I'll be flipping over each of the strips this way. I'm working on one of the sides, so I'll be alternating the strips. When I flip one over, I'll skip the next one and then I'll flip the other one over this way. Just watch carefully to see what I'm doing. This is how to create that design. You may notice that my strips are not matching up when I flip it over. This is happening because I didn't sew exactly in the middle. So to avoid this, just draw a middle line guide on the paper. This will help you sew exactly in the center. I'll be stitching this down to secure it as I flip it. Just watch carefully and you'll understand what I'm doing. I'll repeat this process till I get to the end of my paper. I'm done with one side, now it's time to sew the other side. I'll repeat the same process of flipping it over and stitching it down. Make sure you're back stitching at the beginning and at the end. So this is what the design is looking like. I'll be repeating this process on the second paper. These are the two papers for the front and for the back. Now it's time to attach it onto our dress. I'll be attaching it this way and sewing it down with half-inch sewing allowance. Next, I'll be attaching the lower parts to complete the length of our dress. I'll sew this with half-inch sewing allowance. I'm sewing from the paper side so I can see where my stitch line is. So I'm done attaching it and I'll be taking off the paper. Here's what I currently have and will soon be done with this dress. Now I've gone ahead to weave the joining. Next thing I want to do is to lay it flat this way and top stitch on it. I'm top stitching the allowance on the fabric so it doesn't show through the openings. I'll do this at the top and at the bottom. I've weaved around all my rough edges. The next thing I want to do is to mark my slit opening. I came up by 11 inches, but you can mark whatever length you desire. I'll fold it over this way and I'll sew it down on the white fabric only. I won't be sewing through the black design. I will also hem the bottom of my dress. I'll be using this lace trim to design the sleeve. I'm just going to place it at the hem of my sleeve and stitch it all around. So this is the final look of the dress. I've attached the lace trimming to both sleeves and you can see how beautiful this dress looks. You can see the design at the bottom of the dress and the openings at the side. And this is how the dress looks on me. I added a belt inside to give a little snatch around the waist, but this is completely optional. You can choose to do this or you can leave it the way it is. So we've come to the end of this tutorial and I hope you learned something. Please don't go without leaving a comment to tell me what you think of this video. Also hit the like button, and if you're yet to subscribe to this channel, please do so now. I'll see you soon in the next tutorial. Bye!